Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about the new independent film called Colossal. This film is about a recovering alcoholic who's played by Anne Hathaway. And very early on in the movie, she gets kicked out of her apartment by her boyfriend. There's just a really rough relationship. Whenever they see each other, she's always, intoxicated or hungover. So the boyfriend's just kind of had enough with her, basically kicks her out of the apartment, and she has to go back to her old house, which is over by her childhood town somewhere in New Hampshire, I think it is. So while she's there and trying to figure out what she's going to do with herself, she's trying to look for a job and trying to figure out how she's going to be able to pay for her old house again and so forth. She ends up landing a job with a character played by Jason Sudeikis, who runs this bar at this town. He really didn't get too far. It was just kind of a family-run bar that he continues for his dad since his dad passed away. Um, so him and Anne Hathaway get along pretty well at first, and she works at this bar. Basically, that's how she's going to be able to pay off for this house and everything. But there's this constant story on the news where over in South Korea somewhere, there's this monster attacking the city. It's always at the same time of day. The monster appears and reappears. It doesn't really go into the water or anything like Godzilla or anything like that. But it's always at the same time of the day, and it's always just kind of walking or doing little random movements of some kind. But as time goes on, Anne Hathaway starts to realize that she actually has a connection to this monster that's always on the news while she's working at this bar. Like if she's carrying a bag somewhere, the monster, you'll see him carrying an invisible bag of some kind or something like that. Or if she's moving her arms around, in a unique way at one point into the day, the monster will do that too. But most of these movements and most of these actions come from when Anne Hathaway walks across this park that's in her town somewhere. And almost anything she does on this little park area are things that this monster does at one point during the day. And like I said, this monster always appears and reappears at a certain time of the day, so it's always consistent with that. So basically, over the course of this movie, Anne Hathaway figures out that that she has all this control over this monster. So as a result, she wants to be able to get this monster out of South Korea, to stop having this monster destroying cities and destroying people and killing people and all this other stuff. But throughout the course of this movie, she's trying to figure out how she can take care of this problem, how she can still take care of her problem with alcohol and so forth. So she has a lot on her plate as she's moved back into her former town, trying to figure out what she's going to do with herself. So overall, guys, I like Colossal quite a bit. It's so fresh to see an original movie come out every once in a while, specifically with a monster movie. It's been a really long time where I can say that I've seen a monster movie that feels completely fresh, completely new. And Colossal, I think, really did do the trick. I think it really came up with an idea that is pretty new for the monster genre, pretty new with kaiju films. It's just so refreshing and great to see a movie like this, take on a genre that maybe might be completely new, but it can make it fresh again through an original concept and through an original directing style, like what this director brought to this movie. So it's just so refreshing to see something like this. So for my positives and negatives of Colossal, like I said, I do like how this is an original monster movie. It really is something of its own kind. It's something that really hasn't been done before in a monster movie. So I think that's very original about this movie. The movie is also very well acted. Anne Hathaway, Jason Sudeikis, Tim Blake Nelson, and Dan Stevens all have roles in this movie, and they're all very, very good. Anne Hathaway definitely hits all the right comedic beats throughout this movie. She definitely, because this is more so a dark comedy more than anything else, and I think Anne Hathaway really portrayed that very well and made sure that these jokes hit and land whenever she's supposed to. Jason Sudeikis, I'll get to him when I get to my negatives, but for the most part, I think he acted this role very well. As far as the performance went, it was performed very well. Humor wise, he really wasn't getting a lot to do humor wise. But like I said, I'm going to get back to him when I get back to my negatives. But as far as the performance went, it was very, very good. Dan Stevens and Tim Blake Nelson were also very good in the movie. I also thought that this film was very unpredictable. I really felt like I really didn't know where the story was heading, that it took me to unpredictable places that I couldn't predict when it first started out. So I like how it took me in directions that I didn't think it was going to go in. I liked how the first half of the film I thought was very funny and intriguing. It found a way to always be intriguing and have little its own quirks and to be funny. And so whenever Anne Hathaway was figuring out something about this monster, figuring out something about herself, or trying to establish herself more so within the small town again. So, like I said, I think the first half of this film, I think, is where I really got into the movie quite a bit, just because I really got into Anne Hathaway's character, and I was intrigued by how she was going to handle the whole monster scenario and so forth. So I was very intrigued by this first half of the movie. I also think this film works very well as a dark comedy. Definitely a sense of humor that's very unusual, but I think that's what's so unique about it is it's dark, but not so dark where you can't laugh at it, but it's funny enough where the humor is selective and unique in its own right. So I think that's something that's very unique about Colossal. I also liked how, because I think for the most part, this is a pretty low budget monster movie. I know it's probably a couple $1 million to make this movie, more than likely, for being an independent movie and so forth. But I think that for being the monster movie that it was, I thought for having a limited budget, probably compared to other monster movies, the CGI was very convincing in this movie. These monsters, whenever you're up close to them or they're doing things that really requires the CGI to look really, really good, they definitely did a very good job of that, making sure that this monster really looked good whenever the scales were up close and so forth. They did a very good job making sure the CGI effects looked very good in this movie. I also liked the small town feeling in this movie. I liked how when we're back in the small town with Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis, I liked how everything feels kind of stuck and secluded and kind of everybody doing their own little agenda and their own little repetition every once in a while for their routine and their schedule. So I liked kind of that feeling where the small town kind of was always like this and still is running the way that they remember it and so forth. So I liked the feeling they accomplished within the small town in the movie for the atmosphere. And I also thought the film was shot in a very interesting way. They definitely always found ways to make sure that like the monster scenes or how Anne Hathaway is interpreting something while she's intoxicated and so forth, that those scenes look very interesting and shot in a very interesting way and told to us in a very interesting way for when those scenes happen. For my negatives of this movie, though, there's a character in this film I can't get into too much detail on because it would be spoiler territory, but there's a complete turn of events that happen with a certain character in this movie that really kind of made him unlikable for me. I understand that, the film probably needed a villain of some kind, but when they went through this turn, I just really felt like the character that we were getting to know kind of vanished. It felt like kind of a different character from a different movie. I just really didn't like this huge turn of event that just completely changed, that we never learned the complete motivation for within this character. So I didn't like this turn of events for this character that kind of becomes unlikable after a while. And like I said, I really can't get into too much detail about it without spoiling the movie. Another negative I have with the movie is I feel like it kind of lost its comedic edge after a while. I thought the first half, like I said, was really hitting hard. That Anne Hathaway was really nailing her jokes and was really making sure that the film was continuing on a comedic level that was healthy for the movie. But like I said, after a while, when it starts to go into a really, really dark direction, going into really dark places, I really feel like the film kind of lost its comedic edge the further it went in, and the novelty of the film kind of wore off a little bit. So overall, I feel the comedic edge, though very strong within the first half, kind of loses steam within the second half. I also thought the ending of the film, without spoiling anything, was kind of sloppy and lazy. There's rules that weren't around at the beginning of the film or even the halfway point in the movie that certain characters are allowed to do at a later point in the movie, how things get wrapped up, how things can how characters can possess certain things to get to that final resolution that we see at the end of the movie. Just felt very sloppy and lazy to me. It had a very easy way out, I thought, that really didn't completely work for the ending of this movie. Also, another thing that this film does, more so like I said in the second half again, is there's so many different directions that the film tries to go in because it's kind of many subgenres at once, even though it's a dark comedy. I feel because of all these different directions it's trying to take in the second half, because the second half is probably the more daring part of the movie, it starts to lose that originality. I really felt like in the first half, we really got something original and fresh and kind of in a consistent path. But by the time we get to that second half, there's just so many different directions going on that that original story that we were promised and that we feel like we were heading toward at the first half of this movie kind of got lost because of all these different directions that the film tried to take. And as a result, it felt very safe. And it kind of felt like the typical monster movie we're always getting because it was so safe with that direction that it ended up going in. So overall, I'm going to give Colossal an 8.5 out of 10. It's a film that I highly recommend. There's definitely some really good things about it, but when we get to the negative things, like the character turns and so forth, and the comedic edge wearing off, and the lazy ending to me, and all these different directions that it tries to go in, I feel like the original film that we were promised and that we were getting within the first half of the movie kind of got lost in the second half that was trying to do too many turns and risks and genre establishments within other movies, and it could have just been a dark comedy the whole time. Really just kind of got lost in a film that could have potentially been really, really good, but instead it's just good instead of outstanding. So 8.5 out of 10 for me. Really good film. I highly recommend it, but go into Colossal knowing that it's not completely perfect, that there is some flaws along the way.